This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This morning on the Saturday Breakfast Show, we are talking about learning versus performance. We're going to look at how they are different, why they are different, and what that means in a performance-based education system.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning. It is Saturday, the 7th of December, 2024. You are here with me, Darren Lester, on the Saturday Morning Breakfast Show here at Teacher Talk Radio, where we will be discussing the learning and performance dichotomy. We're going to be having a chat about how they are not the same thing, and yet quite often, particularly in the UK education system, they are treated as if they are the same thing. And how our kind of terminus exam system treats performance as learning, and kind of what that means for the education system. So that's kind of the crux of our show today. As always, if you have anything to say on the topic, there are a few ways that you can be in touch with us here at the Saturday Morning Breakfast Studio. The first is if you are listening live via Podbean, which I can already see a few of you have dropped in, so good morning to you. If you are here live via Podbean, you can text me. It's right there in the Podbean app. I will read your text live on air, unless you tell me in the text that that you don't want it to be read out and it's just for me. And then we can engage that way. If you are listening live elsewhere, because we are available, of course, on all sorts of audio platforms, then you can get in touch via social media, via Twitter and Blue Sky. I'm at Mr. D. Lester on both of those platforms. I have them open in a couple of windows here on the computer, so you can message me that way. Again, I won't read your message out on air unless you tell me that it's not for discussion. And we can discuss that way. And similarly, if you are listening via playback, because we will be available via or as a podcast once the show is done this morning. So you could be listening way in the future. It may not be the 7th of December 2024 for you anymore, but you can still engage with me. You can still message me via social media platforms, because as I always say, the topics that I choose to talk about here on the show are ones that I'm always interested in. And so I'm always really, really excited, and will always be really, really excited to speak with you all. So good morning to everybody who is here. We are in the midst of Storm Darren this morning. Where I am in Gloucestershire, we are kind of on the edge of the danger zone, if you like. I've kind of been looking at maps, and on all of the maps it does look like we are in the very high wind kind of threat to life areas, but thankfully we didn't get the text alert that the UK government sent out yesterday afternoon. So it's looking like where I am, everything is safe. We do have a lot of rain at the moment. We do have very high winds. They have kind of died down a little bit now. I'm just looking out of the window. There's a big bush kind of in front of my window, and it's swaying, but no more than I would consider normal for the beginning of December. But we did have very high, very strong winds all yesterday evening, all last night. So Where I am right now, we are okay. We are safe. I hope that wherever you are okay, and you are safe. And of course, all of us here at Teachers Talk Radio are sending out our best wishes to those who are affected, who may be without power this morning, who may have sustained injury. I have not yet seen any news of anybody being injured, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. And so I'm just going to kind of encourage everybody to stay safe if you can, to stay safe as much as possible. I want to talk a little bit before we get into the crux of today's show about joy. Now, if you were here last week, you would know that we were talking about Thanksgiving, about being thankful, about adopting that practice of gratitude. And part of the reason that we try and do that we try and be grateful, that we try and practice gratitude, that is what is all over the kind of self-help industry, is that practicing gratitude helps to bring joy. Yesterday was St. Nicholas's Day, which across many European countries, particularly the Germanic countries, is celebrated as the day where children will get their Christmas presents. They will be visited by St. Nicholas, by Santa Claus, by the various regional versions of the figure, and it will be that day of awe and wonder, as we like to talk about in primary schools, in kind of encouraging that joy, encouraging that kind of childlike way of seeing the magic in the world. And so I was thinking yesterday about joy, and about what that means. And I was thinking about how there are some people who seem prone to sabotaging joy where possible. How there are people who seem to make it their life's work to kind of, I was going to say lower the tone, but that's not what I mean, but to kind of bring the joy down. And my attention was drawn yesterday to a social media personality, not in teaching. And this person has spent a very long time kind of disparaging one particular social media platform, talking about bullies, talking about trolls, and they've been extolling the virtues of a rival platform, how lovely it is, how safe it is, how quaint it is. And then they made a post yesterday that was deliberately provocative. Not in a way that was designed to encourage debate, as far as I could see, because the topic that they were talking about was not worth debating. And kind of not even in a way that was being provocative to bring joy, not in a way that was kind of gently needling, playful banter, that sort of thing. It just seemed to be provocative for the sake of engagement farming, if I'm completely honest. That is what it looked like. And it got me thinking about how this person who was so gleeful at the idea that this particular social media platform was a much more positive place than the rival platform, that it was less toxic, and that was a selling point, that this person would then kind of not only court controversy, but own up to the fact that they were courting controversy, and that they were doing it just for the lols, as it were. It kind of made me think about how in schools I have met lots of teachers. Well, I say lots, I guess it's a handful, but it feels like lots of teachers who, again, will go out of their way to disparage a new pedagogy, to look for the critique, to look for the flaws. Again, not in a way that is designed to make that pedagogy better, but just in a way to... I actually don't know. I don't know what the aim is. And it just strikes me as very, very sad. It just strikes me as very sad when you've got these people who will deliberately go out of the way to sabotage something that is joyful. I did read once a long time ago, so I don't remember. In fact, I don't remember enough about what I read um, to tell you the story adequately. So I am kind of questioning why I'm even telling you this story. But I did read once about how children will quite often have a compulsion to pick flowers, and there is this compulsion specifically in children. The study that I read was specifically about children, but I believe the authors concluded that it could be extended out to adults as well. That there is a compulsion in some people to sabotage beauty, and there is this idea that things can be too beautiful. That there is something kind of innate within. I can't remember whether it was within everybody or within some people to kind of go out of their way to get rid of anything that they see as being overly beautiful because it's overwhelming, because they can't cope with it. And I do wonder if that's kind of what happens when we find these people in teaching, probably in all professions, let's be honest, on social media, who do go out of their way to sabotage the joy of other people, particularly when it has no benefit for anybody. I believe in debating pedagogy, because I think that's the only way that we can make pedagogy better. In fact, I believe in this so much that that I've set up a journal club. So if you are, this is a good opportunity for me to plug it. If you are an MFL teacher and you are interested in a monthly Zoom meeting to kind of discuss what is going on in the research, please do head over to the Teacher Talk Radio website and sign up for our MFL Journal Club. The first meeting is, in fact, this Wednesday. It's the 11th of December at 7 p.m. And we will be discussing an article that I've sent around about differentiation. But even if you feel like you're a bit too late to read that article, please do come along and join us, because I will summarize the article at the beginning. I will then open up the floor to discuss what the article says. But I think, engaging with pedagogy, engaging with literature, engaging with research, talking about it, critiquing it, but not just critiquing it, offering ways to improve it, is the only way that we can improve our profession. And it's pretty much the only way that you can improve anything, really. Whereas just criticizing for the sake of criticizing, not because you've got an idea of how to make it better, not even because you want to make it better, but just because there is the criticism, I actually think is a bit pointless. Now, I'm going to appreciate the irony here, because it could be that this brings people joy. I don't understand it myself, but that's okay. I don't have to understand everything. But it might be that critiquing these things is a joyful experience to these people. It might be that opening up the nonsensical debate and kind of deliberately tearing down this joyful social medium was something that brought this particular social media personality joy. I don't know. In which case, we need to open up the age-old debate of what do we do in a society when the needs of one person mismatch the needs of both. What happens when one person is brought joy by pulling a pedagogy to bits and not offering any kind of rational critique, but just criticizing, versus the joy of 6 or 7 other people from practicing the pedagogy, from reading the research, and that balance is difficult, and that balance becomes increasingly difficult as the world becomes smaller, as we become more interconnected through social media, through the internet, through podcasting platforms, and all the different ways that we have to have a voice. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, particularly at this time of year, where things are joyful, and I'm going to recognize that things are not joyful for everybody right now. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about a very dear friend of mine who is currently experiencing a bereavement, and so we understand that for him this will not be a particularly joyful Christmas, and I'm not downplaying that. I'm not diminishing those feelings at all. But as I always say, particularly in the UK, where we have so few holidays, we have so few kind of opportunities to express joy, opportunities to celebrate something. I do think that tearing down joy where it can be found, and purposely disparaging things like Christmas, like Diwali, like the plethora of winter holidays that are happening right now that bring people joy, is a real mistake. It's a real mistake because there is not enough joy in the world as it is.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Parentkind are a national charity representing parent views and voice and championing parental participation in education and school life. By fostering strong school-parent partnerships, we can boost student attendance, improve behaviour and enhance academic performance. When parents actively participate, students thrive. Join the movement that's reshaping education for the better. Visit parentkind.org to learn more about reaping the rewards of working in partnership with parents.
Are your teachers juggling multiple technology platforms and struggling to keep everything organised? Then Toddle might be the answer. Built by a team of ex-educators, Toddle offers an all-in-one solution for teachers that streamlines everything, from curriculum planning and assessments to communication and report cards. And the best part? Toddle comes inbuilt with an AI assistant that helps teachers save time and improve their practices. 85% of schools replaced 3 or more platforms when they brought in Toddle. Teachers using Toddle say that the platform helps them save up to 10 hours a week. That means more time for what really matters, supporting students and driving academic success. See how Toddle can support your school. Visit toddleapp.com.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Bet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting edge edtech companies and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week covers targets set by Prime Minister Keir Starmer to boost the proportion of reception pupils achieving a good level of development to 75% by 2028. Labour's Plan for Change also sets out how the impact of its so-called opportunity mission will be measured through attainment at the end of secondary school, but does not set out a specific target. The focus on giving children the best start in life will be measured by improvements in EYFS profile results. This year, 67.7% of children were judged to have a good level of development across areas such as language, personal development and maths. The highest ever percentage was 71.8%, but that was under an old assessment system. According to data published alongside the pledge, hitting the target would mean approximately 40 to 45,000 additional children a year would need to reach the developmental goals. Research from the Centre for Young Lives suggests children who are not school ready are almost 2.5 times as likely to be persistently absent and 3 times more likely to end up as NEET. In a speech, the PM said hitting the milestone was an almighty challenge, as 1 in 3 children are not ready for school at the age of 5. Nick Harrison of the Sutton Trust said the target was absolutely the right ambition, but it will be a monumental task. The government said its first step is recruiting 6,500 extra teachers, but ministers have still not set out exactly how they will meet this. Further details of the plans can be found on the Schools Week website and across media outlets. BBC News Wales reports that university fees are set to rise to £9,535 a year, a £300 increase from September 2025. The Welsh Government's announcement brings tuition costs in Wales in line with a rise already announced for universities in England. It is the second increase in charges for Welsh courses within a year, after the maximum charge went up from £9,000 to £9,250 this September. A 1.6% increase to maintenance support for undergraduates was also announced. A government spokesperson said raising fees was necessary to ensure Welsh higher education institutions remain competitive. Further details and reaction could be found on the BBC News Wales website. Both the BBC and Schools Week also report on comments from Ofsted Chief Inspector Sir Martin Oliver on the issue of school attendance. Sir Martin has revealed he's worried about the rise of so-called flexi-schooling, saying Ofsted isn't able to get a proper handle on the practice. The Inspectorate's annual report warns of a rise in what it describes as unorthodox patterns of education. This includes a small number of schools allowing children to be flexi-schooled, where parents choose to home educate their children for part of the week. The Chief Inspector said he is very concerned that schools can record this as an authorised absence, which means Ofsted can't be sure how prevalent the practice is. He went on to say he has raised concerns with the Department for Education and thinks greater safeguarding is needed. Sir Martin also made reference to an Education Policy Institute report which compared GP registrations with school records for children aged 5 to 15. And found 400,000 children it might expect to see in schools are not attending. Further details on all of the comments made by Sir Martin can be found online. Plans by all three exam boards to introduce on-screen GCSE exams have been delayed due to disruption caused by the general election and the recent curriculum and assessment review. OCR, AQA and Pearson EdXL had ambitions for digital assessment in 2025 and 2026, but require sign-off from the regulator Ofqual. But OCR has said it can't launch digitally assessed computer science GCSE, despite making good progress on the qualification. Whilst Pearson said giving the choice for on-screen GCSE English Language and Literature in 2025 is now unlikely. AQA had already confirmed a delay to introducing on-screen exams for GCSE Polish and Italian. An Ofqual spokesperson said it has not received any formal proposals for on-screen assessments. Ofqual and the Department for Education have been undertaking a feasibility study on what it would take to make GCSE and A-level exams fully digital. Finally, East Anglia Bylines reports that a group of 100 French schoolchildren from northern France were left disheartened after British border authorities denied them entry to the UK due to a minor clerical error. The group of students aged 10 and 11 had been due to spend 5 days in the Scottish Highlands, but British border officials in Amsterdam stopped them, citing incorrect information on the France-UK school trip travel information form. The form is mandatory since Brexit. The error was linked to passport and identity card numbers, reported in the same section rather than on separate designated fields. The group was forced to return home despite each student carrying a valid identity card, usually sufficient for entry under current UK-France agreements, as long as the school they travel with is registered with the French Ministry of Education. Since Brexit, French school visits to the UK have fallen by 60%. Prior to the vote to leave, French educational trips contributed an estimated £100 million per year to the UK economy. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Love the news, as always. I very rarely laugh out loud at the news. Occasionally, when we've got a report that is a bit of a joke, I will chuckle. But I very rarely actually laugh at what's going on because the news is very rarely funny. Not that Joe isn't funny. Joe is very funny, but what she reports on is very rarely funny. But It did make me laugh during that report that we're pushing back the digital exams yet again, and that we're even pushing them back in computer science, the one subject that you would think would be prime for an online exam. Now, here's the thing. I understand that the election will have gotten in the way of things. I understand that we have a completely different governmental body compared to when the exam boards were trying to speedrun, I suppose, the introduction of digital exams. But therein lies the problem, I think, because we are never going to make any progress in this country, in this educational system, if every single time we have an election, the whole thing is uprooted, everything has to be re-requested, everything has to be re-signed off. Nothing will ever change. And that's really frustrating because the research is happening. The universities are in schools doing the research on how to make our system better. Teacher researchers like me are in schools doing the research to figure out how to make things better. But because our system is completely tied up in the government, like entirely, we cannot ever get any traction because the entire government changes and we have to start again. This is something that I've been exploring in my professionalism modules at university. So in case you don't know, and I expect you do, because I'm very conscious of the fact that I talk about this all the time, and I feel like it sounds like I'm showing off when I'm not. But I am currently doing my doctorate in education. And so over the past couple of years, I've had weekends at university where we have lectures and seminars and stuff. It's been really interesting. And one of the modules that we've been studying, particularly this year, is professionalism. And we've been thinking about what that concept of professionalism means and what it means in an educational context. And our professor, in the very first lecture that we had, kind of laid something out very starkly that hadn't occurred to me before. And it's that many professions, in fact, all professions in inverted commas, they have a self-governing body. That's what makes them a profession. It's one of, academically, it's one of the defining features of a profession, is that there is an autonomous self-governing body that is apolitical and kind of looks out for the needs of the profession, the development of the profession. Now, this is something that I think Tom was talking about in his show on Monday. The fact that with the eradication of the General Teaching Council in England, we no longer have that self-governing body. Tom in that show mentioned that the Charter College was supposed to kind of take the place of the General Teaching Council and become that governing body, but it never did. Charter College does some great stuff. It's doing some really good work. It does very good research. It offers some excellent courses. So I'm not disparaging it at all, but it isn't our governing body. Because we don't have one, because as teachers, we report directly to the Department for Education. We report directly to the government. So it is arguable, and we spent a lot of time at uni over the past year debating this. It is arguable that teaching is in fact not a profession, because we are missing this kind of defining concept. We are missing the self-governing body. And what is really striking me right now, and this is one of those times where I'm just kind of thinking out loud, I suppose, but you guys should be used to this by now. One of the things that is striking me right now is because we don't have that self-governing body, because we don't have that constant body that kind of survives elections and will carry things forward through all the different political changes in education. We're not able to make any of these big strides, which does mean we're falling behind. Now, I know that lots of people are against on-screen exams. I know that there are lots of logistical reasons why people may not want them, but we have seen in the US system, we have seen the SAT and the ACT. So those are the two big exams that American students will take at the end of their final year of high school, or during those last couple of years of high school, in order to get into university. We saw, just as I stopped being in charge of that in my previous school, the switch to that being digital. It used to be a purely paper-based exam. It was very stressful for those of us who were running it, counting papers, making sure that we had enough, making sure that they were kept under lock and key. It was a whole thing. And the American system being the American system, they were very, very strict about standardization. They were, to the extent that we as the invigilators had a script that we had to read to make sure that every student was having the exact same experience, no matter where in the world they were taking the exam. Logistically, it was huge. And these are worldwide exams. My centre was the very first exam centre in the Southwest to offer this exam. But we were just a school in the Southwest of England. We were one of hundreds across the world offering this exam. That school still is offering this exam in its digital format, one of hundreds across the world. So I can't help but think, if College Board, the company that is responsible for this, can roll out digital exams on something that is so rigidly standardized that invigilators are given a script to read from, and they can do that, like I said, across the globe, it's actually quite shameful that we're not doing that in the UK or in England and Wales even, because, GCSEs are not even a UK-wide thing. That we can't do that here for our education system because of all of this rigmarole, because of all of the red tape that ultimately is down to the fact that we are not treated as a profession, because we do not have a self-governing body that is looking out for us across different political reigns. Forgive the use of the the monarchy word there. I just can't think of what else you would call it. Terms, I suppose. And so, yeah, that's annoyed me. I'm not gonna lie, that has annoyed me. Especially, I'm on a soapbox, I'm sorry. I will stop talking about this in a minute. But especially because, and again, with my MFL teacher head on, I was interested that Joe pointed out Italian and Polish. So two relatively small language exams. We are so lucky as MFL teachers that we have the opportunity to offer GCSEs in heritage languages such as Polish and in lesser studied languages such as Italian. And it's not even like the exam boards were trying to roll these out immediately in Spanish and French and German, the big ones, the ones that you expect people to take as a foreign language. They were doing it in a couple of the smaller languages. So it would have been a smaller trial, a smaller cohort, so that fewer students would have been affected if there had been a problem. And if there had been a problem, then it could have quite easily been rectified for those students. So, as far as I can see, the exam boards kind of did everything right. I grant that trying to get English and maths online was a big undertaking, particularly for a first round, but they have to be done at some point, I suppose. And both of them, I've taught English language at GCSE and A level, and it's a prime subject for being done on screen. It's an essay-based subject. I think similarly for maths. I've only ever taught maths. I've only ever taught maths up to Key Stage 2, but I've tutored maths up to GCSE. And again, as far as I can see, that's quite a good subject to have on screen, because the pupils can have the calculators there, they can tab between all the different answer boxes. I do think that for maths they probably will need some scratch paper, some rough paper to do the calculations, and I'm not quite sure how they were thinking of having the show your workings questions work, but I'm sure they had figured it all out. And for all of that work to have been not wasted, because I'm sure that the exam boards will be using the same protocols, the same things that they've already figured out when they move forward, when they pick the exams up, but delayed. And again, putting us behind other education systems, such as the US, that has now been doing on-screen assessments for a few years. I think it's a shame. I think it's a real shame. And I think as a profession, we do need to look at the fact that we don't have this self-governing body anymore, that we don't have something that can kind of span political terms and that can help us to drive change and to make our system better without having this constant reset. I don't know who does that, because again, we don't have anybody kind of outside of the government at the top to drive this change. But it is something that maybe union leaders and places like the Charter College could be having conversations with each other and with the Department for Education to get us that governing body, so that we are a profession, so that we can be professionals, so that we can have that trust in us back. And so that we can make driving change that is actually only ever going to be better for our young people.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Parent Kind are a national charity representing parent views and voice and championing parental participation in education and school life. By fostering strong school-parent partnerships, we can boost student attendance, improve behaviour and enhance academic performance. When parents actively participate, students thrive. Join the movement that's reshaping education for the better. Visit parentkind.org to learn more about reaping the rewards of working in partnership with parents.
Are your teachers juggling multiple technology platforms and struggling to keep everything organised? Then Toddle might be the answer. Built by a team of ex-educators, Toddle offers an all-in-one solution for teachers that streamlines everything, from curriculum planning and assessments to communication and report cards. And the best part? Toddle comes inbuilt with an AI assistant that helps teachers save time and improve their practices. 85% of schools replaced 3 or more platforms when they brought in Toddle. Teachers using Toddle say that the platform helps them save up to 10 hours a week. That means more time for what really matters, supporting students and driving academic success. See how Toddle can support your school. Visit toddleapp.com.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Bet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting-edge edtech companies and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
Okay, so, oh, excuse me. Why can I never cough during the adverts? Why is it always immediately when I press the unmute button? Um, we are talking about learning versus performance today. That's the meat of the show this week. This was, of course, the show that I was going to do last week before I made that last minute change to talk about gratitude. So I've had a couple of weeks now to kind of mull over this concept. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that I myself have fallen into this trap, that I've used performance as a proxy for learning, and that I've used performance as a way of saying, look, I did my job because these children learn something, um, without actually thinking about what that distinction is. So, as I said at the top of the show, if you want to engage with the conversation today, please do. If you are listening live via Podbean, you can text me right here in the app. If you are listening live elsewhere, because we are, of course, available where all podcasts can be streamed and downloaded, then you can get in touch with me via both X and Blue Sky. I am at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER on both platforms. And if you are listening not live, if you are in the future, if it is not 9:41 on Saturday the 7th of December 2024 for you, but you are still listening, then please do engage with me on the social media platforms, because I am always willing to talk about these topics. The research that I've done this week, it comes from Soderstrom and Bjork. It's a 2015 integrative review that I have looked at. So that's going to kind of form the core of what we're going to talk about today. And then we'll pull in all sorts of different interesting stuff kind of around that as we talk about this difference between learning and performance. And we talk about this idea of proxies for learning, things that look like learning, things that might get you some ticks in an observation box, but don't actually mean that your young people have learned anything. So let's start with the honest truth. Education, I think, across the world, this isn't just an England-based issue, this isn't just a UK-based issue, this is kind of the same for everybody. Education is a performance-based system. Because at the end of the day, what this boils down to, what kind of matters, is our exam results. It's what in England many schools are rated on. We have these league tables that are based on exam results. It's kind of the reason that children think they come to school. They come to school to get these qualifications, to get their GCSEs, to get their A-levels, so they can go off to uni and get their degree, so that they can go off and have a good job. It's all about that terminus. It's all about the end point. It's all about the performance. It's very rarely actually about the learning, particularly as you move up through the education system. So particularly when you get into what are considered those exam years, I'm talking about, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, it becomes much less about the changes in thinking. It becomes much less about the broadening of horizons, and it becomes more about how are you going to do when you sit in the hall and you get out your black pen, because we're not doing these exams on screen apparently, and you show off what you can do. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with performance. In the world of work, performance is how you are judged. When you are a working person and you have your annual review, it might be called a performance meeting to talk about how well you are performing at your job. But as educators, you would think that our focus would be on the learning. And quite often we think that our focus is on the learning, and we say that our focus is on the learning, but it's not. It's on the performance. And again, as I've been reflecting on my own, whatever it is, 18, 19 years of practice, I started teaching in 2007. I have fallen into that trap. So I'm not being a hypocrite here. I'm not calling anybody out and pretending that I am perfect in keeping that distinction between learning and performance, because I'm really, really not. But there is a distinction. And I think the more that distinction gets lost and the more the waters are muddied, the harder it is to kind of look at what we do with any kind of clarity. Because again, it's the same as that distinction between teaching and learning that gets lost. I always say to my students, it's not even a 50-50 partnership. It's more like a 60-40. I do the teaching, which is like 40% of the work. They do the learning. I can't learn for them. I can create conditions that should lead to learning. I can facilitate learning, but ultimately the learning is not my job in my classroom. The teaching is my job in my classroom. The learning is my job in my office when I am sitting down and writing my essays or reading the papers that I read or whatever it might be. And again, it's the same with learning and performance. They are two completely different things that should be measured in two completely different ways. So just in brief, what are the differences? For me and for Soderstrom and Bjork, they can be kind of summed up quite simply, although we're going to acknowledge the fact that this is a vast simplification. Learning is about change. It's about a durable, flexible change in either knowledge or skill. So learning is about progress. Learning is about leaving a lesson slightly different to how you went into it, because something in your knowledge, something in your skill, something in your ability has changed. And that is something that we are supposed to be mindful of. That change is something that we are supposed to be thinking about. How do you know that learning has happened in your lesson? How do you know that progress has been made in your lesson? It should be because of that change. Now, the issue is that change is personal for each individual child, and that change is internal. It's actually impossible for us as teachers to know whether that change has happened. And I think sometimes as teachers, we can find it really difficult to say, I don't know if something has happened. I can't know if something has happened. But the fact is, we can't know if a child has learned something, because it is a deeply personal, deeply internal process. So what do we do to try and prove to people that we've done our jobs properly? We look at performance, and performance is the observable behavior. Performance is the tested behavior. Performance is a behavior. Performance isn't a knowledge. It's not a skill. It's a behavior. And the reason that we get performance and learning mixed up is because we use performance to judge learning, because we are constantly thinking that we have to judge learning. But the issue is, we're not judging learning through performance. We're judging performance through performance, because we can't actually really know if learning has taken place. And that's really scary. That's really scary, because we can't know if we've done our job properly. But do you know what? That's okay, because it's not about us. It's about the children. So if you have as the teacher, if you have provided the opportunity for learning to happen, for those durable, flexible changes in knowledge or skills to be made, and if you've done that by providing the information, providing the opportunities for discussion, providing the worksheets so that they can try out their new skill, so that they can see if they have actually internalized it, then you have done your job. And I think we need to be a bit braver as teachers at saying, I have done the teaching part. I have done the bit where I have provided the opportunities for learning. It is actually down to my class, down to my pupil to actually learn something. And this is not to say, of course, that making performance judgments is invalid, because performance is quite often how we want to know that something has been learned. Again, if we take MFL, for example, let's take French. You learn your present tense. I always use present tense in French as my examples. You guys are going to be so good at the present tense in French in like 50 years when I'm finally too old to be here on a Saturday morning, because I will have told you about the French present tense every single week for 52 years. But you know that in French, to form your present tense of regular ER verbs, you take your infinitive, jouer, you remove the ER, and you add your EES, ONS, EZ, ENT endings. And you know that, and you didn't know that when you sat down to breakfast this morning, so you have learnt something. But of course, for most people, unless they want to become theoretical linguists, knowing that isn't enough. Having that learning isn't enough. It's actually being able to perform the present tense. It's actually being able to use the present tense in practice that is important. So the performance is actually a vital part of the process. But we do the performance a disservice, and we do the learning a disservice by merging them together, because they are two completely separate things. You can learn something and you can know the theory, but not be able to apply it, not be able to do it in practice. I reckon everybody, every single child who came to the Subutio Club that I covered on Thursday after school could tell me the offside rule, because they are all they are all football fans. That's why they've come to Subutio Club. I reckon they know that rule. Do I think that they could then apply the rule if they were out on the football pitch in order to win the match that they were playing? Oh, look at me pretending that I know about football on a Saturday morning. No, I don't. No, I don't. Because learning and performance are different. Because knowing something, or knowing how to do something, knowing how something is done, is different to being able to do it. I know how to make spaghetti bolognese. That doesn't mean that I can do it. It doesn't mean that it tastes good when I do. It doesn't mean that it's actually better if I just grab the packet sauce out of the cupboard. And it is, because the packet sauce is way better than anything I can produce. So the two things are different. And it goes the other way. It goes the other way. How often have we not really thought about stretching the top end of our class? And what we've actually done to those highest attainers is given them a worksheet that is different to the other kids in the class. It is, in theory, harder, but it's something that they could already do. And we've come out of that lesson feeling really good about ourselves, because they have, in inverted commas, learned the lesson. They've achieved the learning objective, the learning outcome, whatever we're calling it this week, because they've filled in the worksheet. But actually they haven't learned anything, because they could already do that when they came in. They've performed the task, they've performed the knowledge, but there was no change made, because it was something that they could already do. So if no actual change is being made, then no learning has happened. It's a proxy. So this is why it's dangerous to conflate the two, because they are different and they are equally valid. Knowing something but not being able to apply it is still good. It's why things like theoretical linguistics, theoretical physics, anything with theoretical in the front of it, it's why it exists, and it's why it's different to applied linguistics, applied physics, because they require different skills. But we shouldn't pretend that they're the same. So the key challenge that we have in schools then is that performance is often mistaken for learning, and effective teaching requires the understanding of this difference. Because if you don't understand this difference, and if you don't have this difference in mind when you're planning your lessons, then you're not actually encouraging learning in your lesson. You're encouraging performance. And I guess it kind of comes down to what you want your lesson to be. Do you want your lesson to be a lesson in which they've learned something? Do you want your lesson to be a lesson in which they have performed something? Or do you want your lesson to be both? Why does this distinction matter? It's because learning can happen without visible performance gains. And performance gains may not translate into long-term learning. So Soderstrom and Bjork came up with this paradox that errors during acquisition, so what we might call poor performance, actually enhance long-term retention, the learning. We like when children make mistakes, and we tell children that we like it when they make mistakes. We encourage them to get things wrong. No, hold on, that came out wrong. We don't encourage them to get things wrong. We encourage them when they get things wrong. We encourage them that it's good to get something wrong, because then we can correct that learning. So we do use performance as a learning indicator. And when they get something wrong, they see that they haven't learnt it, and they can then make that effort to go ahead and tweak it, and to tweak their learning. But what this means is that in our classrooms, we need to optimize conditions to promote learning and not just to promote performance. We need to encourage that change. Now, I've always been a big advocate for learning journals. Because I think, metacognition has been a buzzword in education again recently. It comes back around every so often. But I think if we do actually encourage our children to reflect on what they've learned, to write down what they've learned in a journal, in a diary that is personal to them, that we don't take in a mark, that nobody ever looks at. And no, I don't know if they've done it, because I'm not looking, because I want it to be personal, I want it to be private. But if they have chosen to draw a stick man in their learning journal instead of writing a reflection on my lesson, that's the choice that they have made, and that's okay. But if we can encourage that metacognition, if we can encourage that looking back upon their learning and thinking, do you know what, this is what I did today, this is how my thinking has changed today, that is a way that we can encourage engagement with the learning on the part of our children. And if we really have to, we can check whether learning has happened without making it performance-based. So I think, if we insist on doing checks, because, we are the UK education system and we do insist on checking everything, nothing happens in the classroom unless it's written down. Then I think a learning journal is the way to go with that. And it can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be in your lesson. It can be as simple as, just write me a sentence about how your thinking has changed today. You don't phrase it as, write me a sentence about what you have learned today. That's a mistake that I've made. Where I've had a couple of minutes at the end of a lesson where I've had some time to fill. Just write down what you've learned today. Because what they will do, because this is what children do, they will tell me what they think I want to hear, and they will just regurgitate the core vocabulary that I've taught in that lesson, or they will ever so slightly rephrase the learning objective. Whereas if we tell them, write down how your thinking has changed, write down how your understanding of the present tense has changed, write down how you consider Henry VIII's break from the Roman Catholic Church to be different today to how you considered it yesterday, then that's going to get them thinking more about what they have actually learnt. So, they can have a journal. It can be a journal just for your subject. It could be something that is given out in tutor time, and they use the same book for all of their subjects. I don't know. That would need to be like a school-wide policy, I suppose. But giving children the space to reflect on how their thinking has changed will really reinforce that difference between learning and performance. Now, there have been some studies on latent learning, done with rats who learned to navigate a maze without any kind of reinforcement. So they learnt how to get through the maze. That change in their thinking happened. Quite how we, or the scientists, evidenced that change in the rat's thinking, I don't know. I'm suggesting it was a performance-based outcome because, of course, the performance improved when rewards were added. And we know this about children. Their performance will improve when there are rewards. Will their learning improve when there are rewards? Not necessarily. And this is something, again, that on behavior courses and rewards courses, we quite often get wrong, because we are told that learning gets better if children are rewarded, that children need that balance of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in order to learn. And that's not actually true. Their performance is improved when they are rewarded. Ebbinghaus in 1885. So none of this is new. This distinction between performance and learning is not new. We just tend to ignore it. But Ebbinghaus talked about the concept of overlearning and this idea of continued practice enhancing retention. So that's another way that we tend to conflate learning and performance, because we know that repeated performance will help with the retention of a concept. But of course, that's not the same as learning, because no change has happened. So what we've now got actually is a third variable coming into play. Our job is really complicated. Our job is very complicated. And I think sometimes this is why we have these confusions. Because I think, and I can do a whole show on the weaknesses of teacher training and particularly in initial teacher training. We try and cram so much in to 1 year of a PGCE, or 3 years of a BEd, or 1 morning of behaviour management CPD, that we kind of have to oversimplify things to make them digestible, to make sure that we can get through them. But what we've now got coming into play is learning versus performance versus retention. And we've got that kind of interlinking between performance and retention, because we can use performance to see if a child has retained a concept. But then you have to think, well, actually, have they retained their learning, or have they just retained knowledge of how to perform? I covered a year 3 maths lesson not that long ago, and we were doing column addition. And I had the children talk me through how to do column addition. They know that I'm a languages teacher, so I pretended that I knew absolutely nothing about maths, and I asked them to explain to me how they do column addition. And they could. And I didn't think about it at the time. I was just like, yes, they are really good at column addition because they can explain to me how to do it. But kind of as I've been reflecting on my teaching of that lesson over the last couple of weeks, I'm just like, well, did they actually show me that they understand how to do column addition, or did they just perform column addition? And actually, is there a difference between those two things? Did they retain the teaching from their normal class teacher from the day before or 2 days before, whenever it was they had last done column addition, and could then perform it correctly? Or did they just retain the knowledge of the performance? And is there a difference between the two? And if there is, does it matter? See, we're getting down in the weeds now, because the terminology behind things gets very complicated. The metacognition gets very complicated. The brain is very complicated. And sometimes I think we do try and oversimplify it because we don't want to get bogged down in the complexity. But in doing so, we oversimplify what we do in every single lesson. And in oversimplifying it, and by conflating learning and performance, and by conflating retention and performance, and retention and learning, we're actually undermining ourselves as professionals, because we are not giving ourselves due credit for everything that we do in 35 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, however long your lesson might be. What we do quite often forget, though, was pointed out by Adams and Reynolds in 1954. So again, this is not new. But performance fatigue is a real thing. So if you, we know this, again, I'll use MFL as an example. In MFL, we put word limits on essays. I'm sure that other subjects do, but in MFL, even at A level, they are told in their essays, write no more than 300 words. And we are very honest with the kids. We tell them that it's because if they start trying to go beyond the word limit, it stops making sense. They get fatigued. And in that fatigue, their performance begins to suffer. It's why we try and move on quite quickly in all subjects, not only because we've got these broad curricula that we need to try and get through, but because we know that if they do the same thing over and over again for too long, they get bored of it, they start making silly mistakes, that impacts their confidence. But the thing is, learning doesn't get fatigued. Learning still persists even when performance starts to stall due to performance fatigue. And we'll see it right now in our schools, particularly where we've got younger children, so if you are in primary, if you're in secondary and you've got years 7 and 8, they are starting to get tired, they're starting to get silly, they're starting to get overexcited because it's so close to Christmas. Their performance is beginning to stall because of that fatigue, because of that excitement. But their learning is still happening. Their changes in thinking are still happening. And so at this time of year, we can start thinking, I'm not very good at my job because these things in my classroom are not going correctly. How many of us dread the idea of being observed at this time of year? Not just because behavior is starting to wane a little bit, but also because we know the performance isn't going to be so good. But the learning that is taking place is just as strong, is just as capable as it was back in September. But because we've got this conflation, again, of learning and performance, we think that learning isn't happening. So be kind to yourself. Be a bit joyful in your lessons. And remember that just because there is performance fatigue right now doesn't mean that learning isn't happening, because learning and performance are not the same thing.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Parentkind are a national charity representing parent views and voice and championing parental participation in education and school life. By fostering strong school-parent partnerships, we can boost student attendance, improve behaviour and enhance academic performance. When parents actively participate, students thrive. Join the movement that's reshaping education for the better. Visit parentkind.org to learn more about reaping the rewards of working in partnership with parents.
Are your teachers juggling multiple technology platforms and struggling to keep everything organised? Then Toddle might be the answer. Built by a team of ex-educators, Toddle offers an all-in-one solution for teachers that streamlines everything, from curriculum planning and assessments to communication and report cards. And the best part? Toddle comes inbuilt with an AI assistant that helps teachers save time and improve their practices. 85% of schools replaced 3 or more platforms when they brought in Toddle. Teachers using Toddle say that the platform helps them save up to 10 hours a week. That means more time for what really matters, supporting students and driving academic success. See how Toddle can support your school. Visit toddleapp.com.
Hey education changemakers, ready for something special? It's Bet Show's 40th anniversary and we're throwing a free celebration just for you. Join us at London Excel from January 22nd to 24th to connect, learn and be inspired. Picture this, 300 plus speakers who truly get it, 600 cutting-edge edtech companies and all the fresh ideas you need to make 2025 your best year yet. So why wait? Head to uk.betshow.com, grab your free ticket and come celebrate with your peers. Because this is for you. See you at Bet.
So, given that I'm not arrogant enough to believe that sitting here and having breakfast with you on a Saturday morning is going to completely change and revolutionise our educational system, I wish that it would. How can we take this theory that we've been talking about? How can we take the fact that we now understand that learning and performance and retention are all very different sides of the triangle that is what our children are expected to do in the lesson, and how can we make that work in the system in which we are working until Darren manages to change it. The first thing that we need to look at then is the distribution of practice. Now, I talk about this quite a lot because I've become a little bit obsessed with the forgetting curve. And I tweeted not too long ago about how I think, as well as the curve of forgetting, so this idea of how much a child will retain from your lesson after X amount of time after your lesson, which I still think should be used when creating timetables. But that, again, that's a whole other show. We need to think about a curve of letting it sink in, because I taught a year 5 lesson not too long ago. I may have talked about this on the show, where I taught the concept of mon, ma, mes. So in French, we have 3 different words for my, depending on whether the noun that you're talking about is masculine, feminine, or plural. So mon for masculine, ma for feminine, mes for plural. Taught this to year 5. Year 5 understands the concept of masculine, feminine, plural. They understand the word my. So I taught them 3 different words for mine. And, we had the usual confusion. The girls were all saying ma for everything because they thought that because they were girls, they had to use the feminine. So I re-explained it and I was like, no, it doesn't matter what gender you identify as. It matters the gender of the word. And, it was 30 minutes and some of them got it and some of them hadn't. And they left and I felt awful because I thought that I hadn't achieved my learning objective. So I had them the next day And I was like, right, I'm just going to reteach my lesson. They didn't get it. They didn't get it, so I'm going to reteach the lesson. I did some retrieval practice. This was literally 24 hours later. Their lesson was at 12 o'clock on I think it was a Tuesday. They came back at 12 o'clock on Wednesday. So I thought, right, we'll do some retrieval practice just to kind of get them warmed up. And I asked, write on your whiteboards the 3 French words for my, and every single one of them did mon, ma, me. And then I was like, okay, the French word for tortoise is la tortue. How am I going to say my tortoise? And every single one of them wrote ma tortue. The spelling of tortue was a bit iffy, but I didn't really care about that because I was testing the mon, ma, me. And I did it. I pulled out as many different kind of random nouns as I could think of. And by and large, they were right every single time. Because the learning had happened. Because that change of thinking had happened. And the learning had happened in that 24 hours between lessons, even though the performance the previous day had suggested that it hadn't. So I was able to move on really quite quickly, and I was very happy with that. And that had me thinking about distribution of lessons and distribution of practice. And this concept of massed practice. So kind of doing lots and lots and lots of one type of exercise, lots and lots and lots of mon, ma, me in one lesson that has quick gains during the training. So where you've taught your concept and then you get them to do lots of activities based on that concept. They're going to display quick gains during that lesson, but there's going to be poor long-term retention. This is why Rosenshine's principles talk a lot about the interleaving and the revisiting, because the evidence behind spaced practice suggests that there is slower initial progress in performance, but better long-term retention and transfer. And again, this is why it's very important for us as educators to stand up for ourselves and say that learning and performance are different. Because I've taught the concept, and in this lesson, they may not be very good at applying the concept. They may not be very good at performing the concept yet, but that's because it's a different skill. And if I keep interleaving it, if I keep coming back to this same concept over and over and over again, eventually their performance of it will get better because they will have been trained in that performance. And again, we do have to be careful there because this is sometimes where children can get bored, because we are training them in the performance of a concept because they struggle with the performativity of it, even though they've already learnt it. And they will say, oh, but I know this. I know how to do this. Why do I have to keep practicing it? And you just kind of have to be honest with them and say, because in a performance-based system where you've got to be able to do this in an exam that doesn't ask you to tell me whether you've learnt it, it asks me to show that you can perform it. You need to be able to perform it. So again, we do our children a disservice by conflating learning and performance. Because at the end of the day, they don't need to show learning. They don't need to show that change in their thinking. They need to perform these skills that we are teaching them. They need to perform this knowledge that we are teaching them. There were studies done with postal workers in the 70s who studied typing, which found that spaced study, so kind of spaced repetition, the interleaving, outperforms massed study even though it feels harder. So children are going to feel good if they've done a whole page in their exercise book of column addition and they've got them all right. They're going to feel great about that. They might not feel so good if I teach them about column addition. We do one or two things and then I come back to it the next day and I ask them to practice it again, perhaps without such a long explanation. But it's that spacing that keeps reactivating the knowledge, it reactivates the learning, and so it has better long-term outcomes. We need to vary our practice. None of this is new. Okay, I'm not sitting here pretending that I am revolutionizing education. Like I said, I am telling you things that we were all told in our training. I'm telling you things that we are all constantly told in our CPD. But do you know what? Very rarely are we ever told why. We all know that varying up your activities is what you should do. And, you know, if we ever get an explanation, it's often boiled down to it makes it less boring. You know, it keeps their engagement. But no one really ever tells us why we should be doing these things. And I think if we understand the why, then we are better going to know why. We're better going to implement them. So varied practice fosters adaptability and transferability of schools. The new MFL GCSE has been quite controversial because the exam boards have eradicated topics, and lots of teachers don't like that. And lots of teachers have already started topic mapping the vocabulary and the grammar, and the textbooks have been topic mapping vocabulary and grammar. But what the exam boards have done and have understood very cleverly is that one of the big issues we have in MFL is that children struggle to transfer grammar. If they learn the verb to like plus infinitive in the topic about healthy eating, I like to eat eggs and bacon in the morning because it provides protein, they actually struggle to take that same grammar concept and apply it when talking about hobbies. I like to listen to pop music because it's catchy. They really struggle with that application where they learn things in a very rigid topic-based environment. So variability of practice actually helps them to overcome that rigidity, and it helps with that transferability. Unfortunately for us, topics are the easiest way to teach something. And, you know, again, I say this as somebody that writes textbooks. I'm still using topics in my textbook because they give me an easy way to present the information. It feels better. It feels more organized. But sometimes we've got to get over our feelings and understand what is better practice. So varied practice fosters adaptability and transferability of skills, which we know students struggle with. Changing the study environments enhances retention. Now, I find this really interesting because I've long been a believer in the idea that children should be tested in the same environment in which they study. I read lots of studies when I was at uni the first time about how, you know, tests done in a classroom, children tend to do better on vocab tests, for example, than they do in their GCSE because they are sitting in their classroom doing the vocab test. They can make associations between what they were looking at when they heard the vocabulary and what that vocabulary means, so they can look over at the poster and they can remember. Whereas if they're then sitting in an exam hall, they're in a completely different environment, they don't have those associations. So what I found quite interesting in this idea that that the changing of study environment enhances retention, I guess, is because they stop making those links. They stop thinking, oh, I was looking at the tree out the window when Mr. Lester taught me the word for squirrel. And so I remember that the word for squirrel is Einhörnchen, if we're in German. And because they're moving around, they then have to rely on their own schema on their own brains, on their own learning, without the visual clues, without the external clues, in order to get better. So variability of practice broadens skill application and knowledge base because they stop relying on environmental cues, and they start relying on their own innate knowledge. And of course, retrieval practice, good old retrieval practice. The active retrieving of information strengthens memory more than rereading. How many times do we tell pupils not to just reread their notes, not to just highlight their textbook to the extent that everything is a very pretty rainbow, but to actively practice? And this was proven in a study test cycle by Rodiger and Karpik in 2006, where the children who revised by doing practice questions, by performing the knowledge, did better than those who were just rereading, because at least when they were performing the knowledge, something was happening. Whereas if they were just rereading pages in their textbook and the change of thinking had already occurred, so they weren't actually learning anything by rereading the textbook, and they weren't actually practicing their performance by doing any kind of activity, they were just passively reading, it's not going to sink in. There is a counterintuitive finding, though, to the study test cycle research, which was where testing seems to be less effective in the long term, but less effective in the short term. I got that completely around the wrong way. Less effective in the short term, but more effective in the long term. So in the short term, vocabulary testing seems like it's not very effective because things aren't going in. And actually, to be very honest with you, that's the reason why I gave up vocabulary testing. I don't do vocab tests anymore because to me they seems like a waste of time. But actually, in the long term, they do make things better. I guess because we are constantly getting children to reapply that knowledge. Now, I'm going to suggest that there are better ways than testing that you can do that. I'm going to suggest that there are ways that you can formulate your activities. That means you don't have to constantly do mini quizzes in order to get them reactivating their knowledge. But it is that reactivation, that retrieval practice that is really, really important. Quizzing is an easy way to do that. You know, jump on Quizlet or Educate or any of the online platforms, and they will generate quizzes for you. So even as the teacher, you don't have to do very much in your limited PPA. But there are other ways that it can be done. And finally, as I talked about before, there's that metacognition, getting the children to think about their learning, not their performance, but their learning. How is their thinking changed? Because learners are biased. According to studies, learners have massive overconfidence issues if they keep rereading something. Learners think that rereading is learning. And again, this isn't new. The English word lecture, like when you go to a university lecture, comes from the French word lecture, which means reading. We have this idea that reading is learning, and learners will feel overconfident in constant rereading and constant massed practice. They misjudge familiarity with understanding. How many times has a child said to you, "Oh yeah, I already know this," when you have reintroduced a concept in the lesson, but what they actually meant is, "Yes, I remember you telling this to me before." They didn't necessarily learn anything because their thinking didn't change, but they're familiar with it. They've heard of the concept, so they think they know it. And so getting children to think about their learning, to think about their practice, to think about their outcomes, having those metacognitive conversations with them or getting them to write it down is going to give you an insight into what they think is effective and what we need to teach them about study skills, as well as giving them an insight into how their thinking has changed. Thank you, as always, for listening. I hope that you've all found the last hour and a half interesting. I found it interesting. So as always, I've loved doing my shallow dive into this. Ultimately, what I really, really hope that we can all take away from this, either for our young people or for ourselves, is that learning and performance and retention are three corners of the triangle, if you like, that all come together to be what we want our children to do in school, but they're not the same thing. They're not the same. And if we treat them as being the same, we actually are not doing our jobs properly. Thank you very much. Do stay tuned, because we do have a lunchtime show coming up, I believe, at 1 o'clock today. So stay tuned for that. Again, if you are an MFL teacher and you are signed up for Journal Club, I will see you on Wednesday evening. I'm very, very excited to be talking through that with you. If you're an MFL teacher and you're not signed up for Journal Club, please do head over to the Teachers Talk Radio website, where you can find all of the information that you need to get signed up very, very quickly. If I do not see any of you before next Saturday, I hope you have an amazing week. Let's make it filled with joy, because it's a time of year where I think we could all do with some more joy. And let's fill it with differentiation between teaching and learning and outcomes and performance and everything, because everything is a different concept. And I will see you next Saturday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.